Good afternoon, buenas tardes, and thank you for tuning in today. On behalf of Mitchell Kaplan, the Miami Book Fair, and all of us at Books and Books, I welcome you to a virtual afternoon with Katherine May to discuss Wintering, the Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times, published by our friends at Riverhead Books. Wintering is the #1 Indie Next pick for December, and this list is from booksellers around the nation, reflecting the best books that they're reading and recommending, so that's quite an accomplishment. Wintering is an intimate, insightful book exploring the ways we can care for and repair ourselves when life knocks us down. And what better time could there be for this book than right now? Katherine May is a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. Her journalism and essays have appeared in a range of publications, including The Times of London, Good Housekeeping, and Cosmopolitan. She lives by the sea in Whitstable, England, and is an avid lover of the outdoors. To speak with Katherine this afternoon, we're very lucky to have the wonderful Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is a meditation pioneer and industry leader, a world-renowned teacher, and New York Times bestselling author. She's the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and the author of 11 books, including the New York Times bestseller Real Happiness, now in its second edition, Loving Kindness, and her newest book, Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World, released in September of 2020 from Flatiron Books. Katherine and Sharon will be speaking for about half an hour, and then we'll have some time to take audience questions, so please go ahead and put them anytime during the broadcast in the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And remember, you can order your copy of Wintering or any of Sharon's books from Books and Books below by pressing the green button at the bottom of the screen. And every purchase you make keeps Books and Books up and running, so we thank you. And now, without further ado, I'd like to bring our guests to the stage. Hi, Katherine.
Hi.
Hi, Sharon.
Hello. And hello, Katherine.
Hi, lovely to meet you, Sharon.
It's lovely to meet you. I was so delighted to be asked to join you all. I'm very fond of Books and Books and books in general, and it gave me the opportunity to read your book. So I'm so curious. When did you write this book? When did you turn it in?
So I was thinking about that the other day, and I feel like I've lost track. So it would have been nearly 2 years ago, I guess, when I finally turned it in. Because, as you know, the publishing process is much slower than most people realise.
Yeah.
So I turned it in the March of, so what, oh my goodness, is that 2018? It can't be 2018. 2019. Yeah, that's what it is. I have a very poor grip on the passage of time.
Well, we all do these days. It's a very unstructured, strange kind of melting life. So, of course, I'm asking the question because I was just talking to somebody the other day and said, what literature do you think is going to come out of our current conditions? And some, tragedies and difficulties or adversity, of course, brings forth great creative expressions, although perhaps not all. And I said, well, it can't be like the same story again and again, like, the pandemic came and I had to stay home, and then this, and then when I was reading Wintering, I thought, oh my God, she did it. It's like, it's such an incredible reflection of the kind of challenges people are going through, right down to homeschooling your child. So I was kind of awed by that.
It's a question that I'm asking myself, because I'm now writing my next book, and I don't know what to say in this moment. I can't think that it will be interesting for us to carry on talking about the kind of minutiae of living through a pandemic, because it's kind of so commonplace, but it's also, I don't know, just it changes with every kind of month that passes, doesn't it? And we go through a phase, and then the stuff we were doing last month just seems like such a long time ago. I mean, when I think back to March and April when we were all fighting over packets of toilet paper in the UK, that seems like a lifetime ago now. That doesn't even seem like a funny joke anymore. It's just past history. So yeah, I think there's a bigger question about what will the shakedown be of this time? What will we think about this period that we've lived through? Because I don't think the reckoning has happened yet. It's to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that, actually, because there's a lot of unknowns. So it's a beautifully written book, truly.
Thank you.
And I admire the craft of writing quite a lot, and it's well done. So congratulations.
Indeed. Thank you.
And of course I was intrigued at hearing that you were a meditator, or reading that you were a meditator, and that maybe you could say a little bit about that. And then one of the powerful lines, or one of the powerful points you made, which I completely agree with, was that is in your meditation practice that you felt most connected to others. And that's something I say all the time, because I am moved by the irony of that in a way, because it looks like a completely solitary activity, and that you may be all alone, you may have your eyes closed, and yet it leads to this other state.
Yeah, actually, when I first learnt to meditate, one of the first things the teacher said to us all was that that you will, through meditation, you will spontaneously get a sense of connection to others at some point. And he said, you don't have to believe in anything for that to happen, like that will occur. And I was really cynical about that, I won't lie. I thought that I was going to learn to meditate to, manage stress, these very surface kind of goals for it. And it, it wasn't instant, but I found after a while that I kept getting this image in my head of a river. And I didn't know what to do with the river when I was meditating. And I kept thinking, okay, well, I'm going to walk into this river. I'm going to imagine walking into this river. And I'd walk into this river and then imagine myself bumping against all these different rocks as I went down. And I was like, well, I'm not doing the right thing with the river. But then eventually, one day it kind of occurred to me that I needed to merge with the river. I was the river. Like the river was everything. And after that happened, it kind of downloaded this sense of absolute community with others, and this sense of being part of one enormous being rather than being a small being that lived next door to other beings. And yeah, I don't think this book would be possible without meditation. I think many of the insights that come from it are mindful, but also, again, about being part of humanity rather than being an individual in there. That would be what I'd say. It's the thing I cherish most in my life, definitely. It's the thing that gets me through, without a doubt. I feel like I can't tell you anything about meditation. I feel very self-conscious right now.
No. I completely agree. And I was very moved to see that statement in there, because it's so hard to explain to people how it's not withdrawal, in fact, although it seems that way, that there's something very potent about seeing what is, what's true. And that is something that's actually true, that we are all connected, which also doesn't mean we like everybody, but that we're just inextricably connected.
Yeah, I really think that's true. And it bothers me the way that meditation's often presented in the mainstream as as like an individualist pursuit in itself. Like you're doing this for yourself, for actually quite surface reasons. I mean, hands down, that's where I was going when I first learned too. And that's such a massive inaccuracy. And I also think it's why so many people give up so early, because it can be hard. Like you have to sit with it for a long time and commit to it, and it rewards your repeated return rather than, there's no technique that somebody could tell you that like you'd see fireworks first time. Yeah, I don't think we've got to the place where we're having a useful mainstream conversation about what it is and why you might even do it, maybe. Certainly not in the UK. I think it's a bit different for you guys. I think there's more of a conversation.
Well, there's another line or another statement in your book that almost completely reflects something that I talk about a lot, is that happiness is a skill. First of all, happiness is not endlessly seeking pleasure or trying to avoid discord or pain. And it's also not something superficial. It's something very deep and something that gives us, I think, the kind of inner resource to care about others and the inner resource to face adversity, when things aren't so delightful or whatever. And I think not only is that a controversial statement, that happiness is something deeper than endlessly seeking pleasure, but the idea that it's a skill is very controversial. That can actually cultivate ways of paying attention or ways of being or communication or whatever it is that can actually enhance that. So I was very struck by that statement in your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend, as with many good things, I think we tend to model them as things that happen to us spontaneously or not at all, and so happiness is this thing that occurs if you are happy. There's this almost circularity to the way we think about it, and it's also like a top note only. And I think I think about food a lot, but I think if you think about like a good dish, it has layers of notes. You have those kind of stinging top notes, like your lemon juice on top, and you've got those bottom umami notes. And happiness has got layers, and you have to cultivate those layers. Like they will not just land at your doorstep. And if you can work on it and work with it and know in yourself what makes you happy, and all those things that happiness is related to, like security, contentment. It's not just jumping up and down and squealing. It's like it's a multi-layered, faceted, encounter with the world. And yeah, I think it's about time we talked about the hard work of happiness, actually, the grunt work that comes behind it. That when something like this happens, that you can still have that resource to fall back on, that it will still be there for you because you've laid that groundwork for it.
And I wonder if you could tell us something about the title, which is so perfect. Like, what does wintering mean?
So wintering is a word I've borrowed from loads and loads of other sources, actually. It's a word that has always really meant like surviving winter in nature. And for me, I wanted to use it very specifically to think about metaphorical human winters. So those periods when we are out in the cold, when we feel kind of cast out by the world. And I wanted to draw this connection between a whole range of really common experiences that we tend to think we endure in isolation. So, like bereavement is a really common one that kind of makes us feel very separate from everybody else for a long time. Divorce, illness, mental or physical illness. Sometimes it's just about going through a huge change, that you don't feel in step with the rest of the world for a little while and you feel kind of cast out. And what I wanted to use the word to say is like, guys, we all actually know this state of mind, and we're all carefully not talking about it. And so we feel like we've uniquely failed when we winter. We feel like we've done something wrong, or that our response is much worse than everybody else's. And if you take a really close look at it, it's something that we have in common with each other. It's actually one of the things that could potentially unite us, this knowledge of this state of being, and the ability to therefore be compassionate to each other when we're in that state of being too. I think we miss out on so much when we can't talk about those wintering periods.
It's true. There's such a shame or even stigma attached to that kind of challenge, which is taking us away to some degree from our normal activities or support systems, and paying a lot more attention to subtlety than we ordinarily do when we count on greater and greater stimulation in order to feel alive. And the elements of our self-worth may be different and eroded, and in some degree in the conventional sense, and yet here we are.
I remember when my son was a baby and I was finding it very hard to cope, and I was chatting online to another woman who had a small baby, and I said, how's it going for you? Because I have to tell you, I hate this. I just don't know what to do with myself in this situation. And she said, okay, here's how I'm coping. I get dressed to shoes. This was her phrase. I get dressed to shoes before my husband leaves the house in the morning, which meant that she and the baby were fully dressed, coats, shoes, everything. And she said, like, that, if that is the biggest achievement of my day, then I'm like good with that. And she said the rest of the day might just be a complete blur, but I have got dressed.
Wow.
And actually that was really positive advice for me in that moment, because what she really was telling me is like, you don't need to you can't be achieving a big list of things right now. Like, you have to let a load of stuff go that was normal to you before this happened, and know that actually tiny things are life. Your life is formed around minute gestures of survival right now, and that's all you can do. And I think that's one of those wintering insights, actually, that we need to reframe what we see as a good day sometimes, and that means setting aside a whole load of ego about what we should be doing and accepting tiny things as gifts. Tiny things. I ate lunch today. I stayed hydrated. I managed to get outside and breathe the air for a minute. I mean, like, those tiny things. And then what that invites is close attention to the world. If we're not busy doing, then we're invited to pay attention to small, beautiful things, and to feel awe at very tiny things too. And that's what opens up that joy, even in those very dark moments for me.
Maybe we should talk about homeschooling for a moment, because that's another. I have a friend who actually, in the several months ago, in the beginning of that school year, or just before then, she wrote something on Twitter saying, if anybody lives in a district where there's going to be safe schools, where kids can actually go to schools, we'll move anywhere. Like, we cannot tolerate another season of homeschooling. That it was just beyond so many people. And it was so funny kind of reading it in your book, and so beautifully written, given what so many people are going through right now.
And I think it's really important to say that the way that we've been homeschooling this year, like, no homeschooler would ever have done it this way. It's horrible. I mean, not only have many of us been trying to work full time while homeschooling, both parents, but also dealing with work coming from schools that has often been, 5 or 6 hours a day of regimented schoolwork that we are having to sit over our children effectively like make them do, because they don't want to do it because it's horrible. I mean, I used to be a teacher. I wasn't a primary teacher, but one thing I do know about the way that a classroom operates is there's a kind of alchemy that happens, that they all do it by mutual consent. Like the work gets done because everyone else is doing it. And the minute you get on your own with a student, they kind of freeze and nothing happens. And I mean, for me, like when I decided to take my son out of school, I'd never, ever had an ambition to be a homeschooler. Like I say that in full admiration of homeschoolers, but I always knew that it wasn't the kind of thing that I deal with very well, to be honest. And, you know, we made the decision because that's what he needed. He needed us to take action. He was very unhappy and he needed us to take radical action, you know, to help him to regain his equilibrium. And the first thing I said was like, right, we're not doing any schoolwork. Like, I don't care if you get behind on maths or whatever that means. Like that's off the table. We're just going to live. You know, we're going to go to the woods and we're going to build camps and we're going to watch telly sometimes and we're going to draw and like we're going to read together. And that's such a different experience to pandemic homeschooling, because he wasn't trying to keep up with any cohort online who are marking stuff off on a computer program or whatever. And so when when my son's school closed in March or April, whatever it was this year, I immediately emailed the teacher and was like, I'm not doing any work. I just need you to know that I've got no intention of doing any schoolwork. And they were like, that's fine. And that's why I know I'm in the right school, because I've seen other schools, you know, being very different to that. And so we actually reverted to it really easily, because it was, you know, it was a modality that we knew. But I saw other people in howling pain over it because they couldn't let go of this notion of somehow keeping up with an imagined pace that was no longer happening anyway. And the truth is that kids learn, like, you know, particularly primary age children, they're learning whatever you're doing with them. They're just sucking up information, and we have to think about what it is we're trying to teach them. And I just want him to learn to think for himself, like over and above being able to read and write and basically add up, which is like all the maths I use in my adult life, and maybe sometimes some subtraction. But after that, I reach for my calculator. I want him to learn to deal with situations like the one we've been in. And so, yeah, we again reverted to not much. And I would urge everyone in the same boat to revert to not much, actually, because not much is a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. And I wonder if you could say something about ritual, of which you had many beautiful passages.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because I've lived a life without ritual, really. It's not something I grew up with. It's not something I had through most of my adult life, but it's something that I began to crave as I got older. And I'm an awkward devil, you know, like I don't like doing other people. I don't like doing stuff that other people have invented. So I kind of like to make my own. But so in the course of research, I spoke to Philip Cargom, who is our chief druid in the UK. And I had the most amazing conversation with him, because first of all, he was very lovely and funny, and said, look, I know people think being a druid's a bit weird, and I think it's a bit weird too, but I like it also, and it gives me a lot. And he said, like, you just have to kind of get over the awkwardness of feeling like this is a funny thing that people are doing. And I really admired that. And he said that in the kind of pagan imagination of the year, there's this idea of the wheel of the year, which I think lots of people know. And so it's around the solstices and the equinoxes, and then the moments, there's like a moment in between. And he said the thing is that when you look at that, it gives you a ritual every 6 weeks. And it gives you a moment that you're marking, and a way in which the year has moved on every 6 weeks. And when you're in the darkest times of life, and he talked to me about his divorce, his recent divorce, which I didn't end up writing about, but he was talked at length about how he'd recently actually found himself in quite a lot of crisis, and he came to rely on that rhythm of knowing that wherever he was, however difficult things got, he always had something coming, and when that event came, he could look back and use the previous ritual as a marker of how far he got. And I thought, wow, that's actually so simple and so utterly valuable. And of course, I mean, one of the things about that is it's about people gathering too, which we have not been able to do this year. So I do think that a big part of our ritual has gone astray this year, and I think that's been maybe one of the painful parts of it. But so I thought, well, okay, I don't have a faith that gives me ritual, but what can I do to mark these moments? And so I just often light a fire every 6 weeks or so. I light a little bonfire, and it's just a moment of pause and reflection for me. And actually tonight, because it's the longest night tonight, we're going into the longest night. It's very dark here already. And normally I celebrate on the solstice tomorrow with some friends, and we light a bonfire on the beach and watch the sun go down. I can't do that tomorrow. We're not allowed to gather, even outside. And I thought, actually, I felt so low today, knowing that even that simple ritual was denied to me. Like just that, I just needed that uplift. And I thought, okay, well, I can start this early. So we went down to the beach, me and my son and my husband, with the dog, with her new light up collar so that we don't lose her in the dark. And we took some empty jam jars down and lit some candles on the beach to sort of see the sun go down. And as the candles kept blowing out, because nothing's perfect in this world. And we decided to build little oyster, because we have lots of oysters on our beach and loads of shells. And in the summer we build these things called grottas, which are little structures made of oyster shells that you build up around a candle, a little hump of oysters, and they glow really beautifully. And we thought, okay, we'll build a grotta. So as my son went off to fetch some shells, I just had a moment with the sea and with my thoughts, and it was enough for my emotions to settle. Just that moment, just acknowledging that I was doing something against the darkness, and acknowledging that it was hard, and that I was allowed to find it hard. And I felt myself just settle, and that's what ritual does for me. It's not much, it's not big, it's tiny, but it's a gesture towards not control, but acceptance, I think. Do you have a lot of ritual in your life?
I have some ritual. It's not like every 6 weeks, but listening to you, I thought, oh, what a beautiful thing. It's not necessarily tied to cycles, but more life events. If somebody gets sick, or right. Somebody has a wonderful occurrence, or it's very interpersonal in that way. Or the signal, oh, let's think about doing that, is some occasion that has happened in someone's life. But I was really moved by reading about your druidic experiences. And
I'd happily join them. I think they sound like really fun people to be with now, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
And then maybe the last thing I'll have time to ask you was also a wonderful phrase in your book about the Christmas period, which is, we have turned the year.
Yeah. And that's I gather it's quite an old English phrase, actually. I've thought about that a lot this year, because it's tomorrow night that we turn the year. And like, what does that mean to say that? So you repeat it, and I learned it at Stonehenge at the winter solstice, and everybody said we've turned the year, and they'd come and shake your hand, which was lovely. Those kind of things make me cry. Like, there's something about it. Those, again, like feeling that force of loads of people do something together. I just feel with emotion. So I've repeated it a lot, like turning the year. And what does that mean? Because I'm profoundly against feeling like we're in control. And it could be a bit King Canute-ish, almost like we're trying to turn the tide back. We turn the year, like we've forced it round. And I don't think I think it's gentler than that as a phrase. I think it's like we've been present while the year turns, like we've been part of the movement of the seasons. We've melded with it, if you like, rather than we've pushed against something that didn't want to happen. And I find that a really beautiful, gentle thing to do. And I've started taking part in a very old English ritual in mid-January now, which happens at the Epiphany, called a wassail, which I don't think anyone's ever heard of in America. And it's this sort of very old, like the first recorded one was in the 1400s, and that's a recorded one. But it's this old ritual of blessing the cider orchard in the depths of January when the trees look dead. And that's another very kind of gentle ritual that takes place just to urge the seasons on, rather than to exercise any power or control over them. And so you go and feed the trees with the cider from the previous year. So it's a lovely circularity. And then everyone like makes a big noise, like you know, they let off firecrackers and bang pans to scare evil spirits out of the orchard. And and I just find myself grasping onto these very beautiful moments, because we, you know, like then everyone sings like quite an old carol that says, you know, wish you a blessed new year. And you just think, okay, like, isn't that a nice thing to wish everybody? Like, why? Let's make time to do that. Why not? And to ask the world to give us apples in the new year. I really like the lack of force about those quite ancient. There's something very respectful to the earth that's embedded in them. That's not about dominion, actually, but about integration. And I for me, that's very, very, very beautiful.
Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful reading your very, very beautiful book and getting to meet you, in effect. So perhaps someday when travel returns. I know people tend to call the period before the pandemic the before times. I don't know what, if we're going to have the after times or whatever, but someday it would be really wonderful. And there's time for all of you listening to ask questions.
I would like to remind everyone who's watching that you can go ahead and post a question. We don't have any yet, so I think people have been listening intently. But I can ask you one. So where do you think, Katherine, that your sense of this sense of grace, I guess, that kind of unites things and makes you able to have a balance in your life in how to deal with rest and retreat, where do you think that comes from? If you could share some of that, maybe just from, were you shaped that way as a child? Were you taught those things? Because you were talking about, you know, education and how interesting that is too, just how we are shaped and formed.
It's very hard fought for me, actually. I did not have good mental health when I was younger. And I can remember being depressed as young as my son is now. He's 8. And I kind of limped through my teenage years feeling very unhappy, and had a complete breakdown when I was 17, when I couldn't do anything, like literally couldn't wash, dress, eat, talk, like nothing. And I remember sitting in that space, that empty space in my head when that had occurred. And I'd been very suicidal. I'd been, really at rock bottom. But there was something about that rock bottom that like opened up a conversation with myself somehow and made me think, oh, well, hang on, I'm still going, actually. And I think that's a survival instinct. And it made me think, because I just felt like I was nothing anymore. I felt completely hollowed out. And that made me think, okay, well, how do I remake myself now? If it began to feel like an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And, like this book is the slow work since then. I'm 43 now. That was a long time ago. That was a long, long time ago. It's the result of loads of missteps and loads more crashes, but the crashes were never as bad again once I'd had that insight that the worst was survivable, that I could get through it.
I'm sure that Sharon has a lot to say on that, because, just when you come face to face with suffering, I think that's the only thing that makes you grow and change and reach, deep. But I'm not going to put words in her mouth. I think of it from the point of view of Buddhism, of course.
Yeah, well, I didn't get a chance to ask all the questions that I had written down, and I do want to leave time for other people, but there was, I think, a very significant part of your book where you talk about not trying to fix oneself or fix someone else, and you talk about a friend with a bipolar condition, and it reminded me so much of times when I've asked some of my teachers, for example, this Tibetan teacher, about how to help a friend of mine who was in a psychiatric hospital for an enormous length of time, which is kind of unusual these days. And in response, the teacher said, well, stop trying, by which he didn't mean stop visiting or stop being present. He meant stop trying, to sort of manipulate the situation or to fix it in some way. And it was so interesting because in visiting him, my friend afterwards, and it's a subtle instruction, because it can sound like stop caring, which it doesn't mean. But visiting him afterwards, and people would come, and it was beautiful that they came because it's not an easy environment to be dwelling in. But often it was with some advice or some recommendation. And as generous and heartfelt as those were, I could sense that the inner result, the inner impression from my friend was pressure. Like, what if it doesn't work? What if I don't get better in 2 weeks? What if I can't meet your hope? And I'm just having my own experience. Where's the love? And I realized from that love is very different from that wanting to make something better, whether it's ourselves or someone else.
That's been such a big insight for my life, because I always knew that I was a little bit different to everyone else, and I eventually got my autism diagnosis when I was like approaching 40. But before then, I had spent my whole life trying to fix myself, and it was a quest, like what's the physical therapy, what's the self-help book, what's the book that I can read that will finally tell me what the answer is to fix me. And spoiler alert, there was none. Although meditation was the only thing that ever helped. But getting that diagnosis had such an interesting effect on me, because it told me that I was this thing. It's not that I had a thing, I was something. And that meant that I had to adapt to being that rather than to try and change that. I couldn't change that. If I could have changed it, it would have changed by now, because I've got a will of steel and I've applied it all my life to this problem of myself, and like why I don't cope very well with things that other people cope very well with. And that was the biggest gift of my life. Like, it made me happy. It made me happy to stop trying to force myself into fixedness, and just to adapt to what I needed. and it sounds like, to the outside, if you've not gone through that process, that sounds a lot like giving up. And I know that a lot of people around me at the time felt like I was quitting, and it was absolutely the opposite. It was actually allowing myself to finally flourish. And it's made a huge, I can't explain the depth of difference that has made to my life. It's just, it's everything.
Well, I think you're there, if I may say. You're there. So
fixed.
You've got it. Whatever that
Mission
is,
accomplished.
I think you've got it. You've got a lot of it. So here's a question from Ashley Schneider. Would you ever consider doing a deep dive into other seasons like you've done with winter?
Well, I mean, for a start, I think I cheated a bit in wintering because there's quite a lot of autumn and a bit of spring in there. So I think I've gone for the Celtic dark half of the year. Let's put it that way. No, is the short answer. I don't think I'm the person to write a book on summer. Like, wintering comes from a passion for winter. I do love the dark half of the year. It's definitely my half. And I don't love the summer. So I couldn't write about the season with the same love and adoration and with the depth of obsession that has to come behind a book like this, where you want to delve into every aspect of it. But also, I don't know if summering is a thing,
Well, in Florida, we have no choice. So
yes.
Our wintering is very strange. we have to be even more subtle about recognizing all of those little tiny changes that happen. But I think, the wintering is just a lot about being, in Spanish, there's this word that I've always loved. It's called ensimismado, which I can't even, but it's like being within, being inside. So here's a question from Scott Talon. What have you thought about doing for wintering, but not yet done, or heard of what other things have done?
So, honestly, the list is endless of things that I would still love to do, like wintering experiences. When I was planning the research for the book, I really wanted to try travelling as far north as possible. I really, really wanted to get to Svalbard, which is in the Arctic Circle. It's an island, and there are icebergs and polar bears. And I wanted to explore this idea of the pull of the north. And there's some really beautiful writing from polar explorers about how the sense of order, like the everyday known world, breaks down when you get to the far north, and people are much more prone to kind of visions and like a very sort of psychedelic experience almost. And I thought, I kind of want some of that as part of the wintering experience, but it didn't work out that way. But I would still love to travel to the far north and to be there for a while, not to just sail past it and look at some stuff, but to actually learn about the quality of living that far north. And I really wanted to encounter the polar winter, like the night. When I was in Tromsø, we were in polar twilight, so there was some light all day. For a tiny bit of the day, but there was definitely a sense of day and night. I really wanted to encounter what it's like to be, midwinter in the Arctic Circle and to not see the sun come out. I can't imagine what that would do to my physical rhythms, actually. So yeah, oh God, there's a list as long as your arm of stuff I'd like to do. Yeah, I could talk about this for quite some time.
So here's another question from Liz Goldberg. Sometimes it can be difficult to accept the need to winter or to allow ourselves to take the rest, particularly when we're changing in ways we would not choose. How might you, either one of you, suggest we approach this kind of acceptance?
Sharon, you start.
Well, actually, another kind of wonderful aspect of reading your book was that probably my favorite word these days is rest. Because I think often of, say, the stress dynamic, which is a dynamic. There's the pressure, the chaos, the circumstance, and then there's the resource with which it's met. And that resource may be inner resource, it may be a sense of community. But I realized that for me, one of the prime builders of that sense of inner resource is rest. I don't mean like just getting a good night's sleep. I mean those moments when we're not lost in a reaction. We have thoughts and feelings and everything is happening, but there's some space. And it's even, it's so primary in the meditation instruction. I read a book called Real Happiness, which came out 10 years ago, which has a lot of guided meditations in it. And the first time I got it back from the editor at the publishing house, she said, "You're using the word rest a lot. Are you very tired?" And I wrote back and I said, "Well, probably, but that's also the word. We learn just to rest because it's almost like without realizing it, so much of our lives we're kind of leaning forward or we're recoiling in fear. We're leaning forward to hold on or somehow feel safe by knowing what's happening next or something like that. And or we pull back and we're just like locked in and just to rest brings us to a place of natural peace. And the other thing I like about it is that you can do it in a moment. It's like remembering to breathe before you embark on a conversation or something like that.
That tiny pause. And one of the insights of meditation, I think, is softening your body while the storm rages on in the inside. Like that is, it's the most incredible thing to learn to do, like to settle in with those feelings and to be soft and open while they're happening. And it's, it takes some practice, but it's such a worthwhile thing to learn to do. And I like rest. I'm just going to agree with you that rest is what you need to do. But I think rest isn't necessarily passive. It's not something that arises and suddenly you're relaxed. Like rest is an active choice to take. And it isn't necessarily about sitting still either. Like we think of rest as lying on a couch, and surrounded by pillows and, a cup of tea. That is definitely rest. But like rest can also be taking a long walk, or rest can be tending to your garden. Like it's a change of action. It's a change of purpose. And rest can feel very uncomfortable if, say, you've decided to rest by not checking your emails for a week and genuinely not checking them, like not just having a little peek. Like rest is there's many books to be written on rest, aren't there? I think it's a much more complex concept than we allow it to be. And it's, there's not loads of this in my book. But it's an interesting one to think about, that rest is a challenging activity, and it's never been more challenging than it is now, because we are not invited into rest very often. So it's I think making space for rest to allow winter to come to you. And I sort of say as well that the people who are intimate with winter and the animals that are intimate with winter don't fight it. They accept that it's coming. And that's all you have to do. You just have to know that wintering will come, whatever you try and do in the face of it. And that changes your response, I think. That act of acceptance and that act of knowing that something's being asked of you, and you've got to find a way to answer that question. You can only do that by softening towards it rather than hardening.
So we'll take one more question from Sarah. Can you tell us a little about your writing process, and how did you decide to organize the book by month even though it's not chronological?
Oh God, my writing project, I hate people asking this because it's so random. The big secret is that I have no writing process. I I sometimes write loads and in the same place and at the same time, and sometimes I write nothing, and I write all over the house and in cafes and in soft play centres where my son plays. So really, like wintering, I wrote a lot of chapters, and about halfway through writing it, I thought, oh, this is happening in months. Actually, this is actually chronological. There's a chronological story going on, even though I'm jumping all over the place. Okay, and then I started thinking, oh, actually, there's 3 movements. There's like kind of going into winter. There's deep midwinter, and then there's thawing out again. And it kind of gradually formed. I think what I don't believe in as a writer is the idea that you should like worry about word counts or how quickly you write. That actually, I think for me, it's about embracing what's actually quite a chaotic process. Keep going backwards and forwards, like it's very non-linear. Keep moving stuff around. But Wintering was my most chaotic book to write because there was a lot happening in my life at the time. I was very distracted. I didn't think I could finish it. And although I only ever wrote one draft, I rearranged the elements of that draft infinitely. And even I remember there was this point 3 days before I was due to submit the book, and I read it through and I thought I can probably send it in now, but deep in my heart I wasn't happy with it. And I texted my friend and said, who's also a writer, and said, I can see a way I could change this, but it's a lot of work. And she said, do it. And I did. I just put my head down and I cut about 10,000 words out of it. I changed the order of loads of stuff. I wrote the ending right at that moment. I suddenly remembered Alan Watts, and I went back into that book, and I was like, I know there's a thing in here that I need to say. And so it felt like a book that only really got, although I worked on it for ages, it felt like a book that only got made in the final 3 days. That's a really useless answer for a writer. I'm so sorry. Like, embrace your chaos. It's how your head wants to work.
I think that was a wonderful answer. And to me, it just points that, I don't know, you seem like such a creative person who leaves a window or door open for creativity and is not afraid of wherever that's going to take you. So for me,
I like the wildness. Yeah.
For me, yes. For me, the rest has been listening to both of you. And there's a sense of peacefulness, I think, that accompanies that. So I thank you for your time, for joining us today, for your work, both of you, and for your sense of playfulness in the midst of all of it. And I take courage from that. And, I think a lot of our viewers will as well. And I hope that everyone will remember to press the green button and order a copy of the book if you haven't already. I know we've been selling it really well at Books and Books. And of course, Sharon's books are perennial sellers at all of our stores. So I want to thank you both so much and just wish you a wonderful, restful, peaceful wintering and holiday season. And I hope that we will see each other in person sometime soon. Okay, so to everyone watching,
that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take good care to everyone watching, and we'll see you the next time.